Almost a year ago, I had my first child. He's amazing and brings so much joy into my life. But that's not why I'm sharing this. Throughout my pregnancy, everyone, especially my mother-in-law, was incredibly kind and attentive. She constantly bought things for the baby and took care of me, making snacks like chocolate-covered strawberries and charcuterie boards. This was all new to me. I wasn't used to so much care and attention. Despite her kindness, I couldn't shake the feeling that she did it more for herself than for me. I wondered if she had ulterior motives. But aside from that suspicion, I had no complaints. I appreciated her efforts, especially when she refurbished an antique crib and matching changing table for my husband and me. It felt like we were turning over a new leaf together. But there was always a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that made me wary of her. She had hurt me many times in the past and didn't treat me well during the early years of my relationship with her son, my husband. Let me give you some context. My husband and I started dating in our last year of high school, and it's been 12 years since then. It was clear from the beginning that she wasn't thrilled about her son dating me. In fact, she seemed disgusted by me. I should mention that I'm from a different cultural background than my husband, and she would make subtle comments about the color of my skin and my family name. I felt like an outsider in my own husband's family, constantly tiptoeing around his mother. When I visited their home, she wouldn't even greet me. And during dinner, she'd set the table for just my husband, his father, his sister, and herself, leaving me to fetch my own utensils from the cupboard. Once I brought over a bag of clothes and purses that I no longer used, intending to donate them. My sister-in-law and I were sorting through them in the living room when my mother-in-law came home and saw us. She asked why we were rummaging through the trash, addressing my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law explained that I had brought them over for her to choose from before I got rid of them. Then, my mother-in-law snapped at her. She said she didn't want us going through the old stuff, and she forcefully took the bag from our hands and threw it over the fence where the garbage was. I was stunned, just sitting there in shock, watching her actions. My sister-in-law looked at me apologetically, but I reassured her that she didn't need to apologize to her mom. Later, my mother-in-law told my sister-in-law to go upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room until my husband came home from hockey practice. Things didn't get any better when it came to our graduation. My mother-in-law didn't want us going together. My husband even told me that she said he shouldn't look back at pictures of us together at graduation because there were prettier girls he could go with. He stood up to her, saying that her threat to stop paying for his hockey gear was ridiculous because the money wasn't hers to spend anyway. It was hilarious when my father-in-law chimed in and agreed with him. Then, when we went shopping for a suit for my husband, his mom didn't want me to come along. She tried to dictate that he needed to maintain a certain grade to stay with me and threatened not to pay for our limos for graduation. We went to different high schools, so we had separate graduations. After we graduated, my husband went away to play hockey during the winter. The only times I could see him were during away games or when I drove to the city where he was stationed. But even during those visits, his mom would ignore me completely, acting as if I wasn't there. She even tried to set him up with other girls, saying she found a beautiful girl at her work who was interested in him. My husband was baffled and told her that he's already dating someone he loves. She did this at almost every away game in the early years. I was at my thinnest because of an eating disorder I was struggling with at the time. Despite that, my mother-in-law still made comments about my body, particularly my butt and hips. Those insecurities about my body just wouldn't go away. She even talked to my sister-in-law about how she thought I was fat and ugly and didn't understand why her son was with me. Of course, my sister-in-law would tell me all of this. She would even ask my sister-in-law if she had any friends who could date my husband. Fast forward to when I gave birth. My in-laws rushed to the hospital immediately. I ended up needing an emergency C-section, and when I was being wheeled into my hospital room after the surgery, I saw my in-laws at the nurse's desk, asking if I was out yet. They tried to get into the room, but the nurses told them they couldn't come in until they were finished checking on me. They'd waited outside the room, which already struck me as odd. While the nurses were attending to me, they took our son out to get him checked and vaccinated. When they'd brought our son back into the room, my in-laws followed. I hadn't even had a chance to hold my son properly yet, except for a brief moment of trying to get him to latch for breastfeeding. Then, as soon as the nurses left, they went over to pick up our son. My husband was too exhausted to say anything at the time, and I was still reeling from the shock of the surgery. They didn't even bother to ask how I was doing. They were just focused on holding and smiling at our son. They actually ignored me completely, directing all their questions and attention to my husband. They asked him about the labor and the surgery without even acknowledging my presence. Despite feeling tired and in pain, I smiled through it, thinking maybe they didn't want to bother me. But they kept coming back to the hospital every day we were there, making it seem like they cared because they asked my husband if we needed anything. All I wanted was a McDonald's breakfast sandwich and an iced coffee, so my husband told them. They said they were on their way, but when they arrived, they brought some strange Chinese food buffet instead. I appreciated the gesture, but when you're craving something specific after giving birth, it's all you can think about until you get it. Every day they visited, they monopolized our son, not asking me anything or even acknowledging my presence. After we were discharged from the hospital, they continued to visit our house. I wasn't feeling well enough for visitors, but my husband didn't tell them not to come over. So I had no choice but to stay up late, trying to entertain them while still recovering from major surgery. A few days ago, I started to feel resentful of their constant presence, but I didn't voice my feelings. Usually, people offer to bring snacks or help with chores when new parents are settling in. But they didn't do any of that. All they wanted to do was hold our son. When my husband got called into work, I felt anxious and started cleaning and cooking, despite being in serious pain, while they sat on the couch admiring the baby. Later, I saw on social media that they posted an announcement about their first grandson, tagging my husband but not me. They even got my son's name wrong, only using my husband's last name, even though I legally hyphenated it to include mine as well. Fast forward 2 weeks, and they basically forced us to go out for wings with them in a pub, which we regretted instantly. A month after giving birth, when we visited their place, I had hoped they would have prepared something special or had balloons as a surprise, but there was nothing like that. Maybe it was the hormones, but I couldn't help feeling upset. To make matters worse, my in-laws were smokers, and they didn't bother washing up before holding the baby. That's when I spoke up and asked them not to smoke when the baby was around, but I didn't even get a response. Then my husband reiterated my request, and she brushed it off, saying it wouldn't harm the baby. I was about to speak up again when my husband intervened, saying we wouldn't come over if they didn't respect my wishes. Finally, she agreed, but it felt like my husband cared more about keeping them happy than respecting my needs. We were visiting them every other day, and each time they would take the baby away from me, which was overwhelming and frustrating. It made me feel awkward. Not only that, but they would show up at our place at 8 p.m. to see our son, disrupting our attempts to establish a bedtime routine. Sometimes they would arrive late, and our son would get a second wind, making it hard for him to sleep until 10 p.m. I had to ask them to come by before 7 p.m. because we were trying to set a sleep schedule for our son. She would respond by saying they didn't do anything like that when my husband was a baby, but I would explain that times have changed, and this is what we've chosen to do. So now that I've started going back to work a few days a week, my mother-in-law insisted on me bringing the baby over to their place instead of her coming to ours. She said I could work in their office, which was actually a nice setup, and I was grateful for their help and support. But one time, she was having trouble putting the baby to sleep. I suggested that maybe he was hungry, so I went to make a tea and realized she hadn't fed him his lunchtime bottle, and it was already way past the time he was supposed to have it. I brought the bottle upstairs and suggested she give it to him, but she gave me a nasty look and snapped at me, saying she knew what she was doing. I insisted gently, saying that he probably needed to eat to sleep, but she got defensive and slammed the door in my face, locking it with my son inside. I couldn't believe she'd done that. My son was screaming, and I was furious, but I tried to stay calm. I knocked on the door and asked her to open up, offering to help, but she told me to leave her alone. I refused to back down, knocking harder and pleading with her to open the door, but she ignored me. Then I tried even harder to get her to open the door, banging on it and using my body to try to force it open. Meanwhile, my son was screaming and crying so hard that he started choking and coughing. I was desperate, so I threatened to call the police if she didn't open up. When she still didn't respond, I dialed 911. The police arrived and instructed her to give me back my baby. They didn't do much else except warn her that she could be investigated for harming a child. They asked if I wanted to press charges, but I decided not to. I told my husband what happened, and he's furious. Now I'm torn. Should I press charges? Am I overreacting? Is this just some kind of postpartum rage? I need help figuring out what to do. Update. My husband took the situation very seriously, and he's just as fed up as I am. I can't believe I let it go on this long. When we got back home and my husband saw the condition of our son, he called his parents and gave them a piece of his mind. He told them they'll never see our son again. We cut off all contact with them right away. My husband didn't want to take any chances with our baby's safety. He said it's not just about us anymore. It's about protecting our son, and he's absolutely right. Our poor baby cried so much that he broke blood vessels in his eyes, and now half of his face is swollen. I feel like a failure for not breaking down that door. Social services even investigated us, which was stressful. I went back to the police and told them I wanted to press charges for child endangerment. They had to take pictures of my son for evidence and took statements from both my husband and me. My father-in-law called my husband multiple times today, but the voicemails all said my mother-in-law finally got arrested after he finished hurling insults at us. It's not my problem anymore. That awful woman is finally getting what she deserves.